Hey there, I'm Alex Kidman and this is the Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra. Let's get into the review. The S25 Ultra is a genuinely interesting phone, and on one hand I can say very easily this is Samsung's best phone to date, and typically in any other given year that should make it an easy recommendation. Hey, it's the best thing they've done. If you like Samsung phones, buy this one. If you're a big Samsung fan, all that is true. But is it the phone that everyone should buy? Well, there I'm not so sure because it really depends where you're coming from. Let's get into this fully. First of all, talking about the design of the phone. But before I start, a quick disclaimer. Not one about receiving a free phone, by the way. Indeed, almost the opposite. This phone I've only basically had for a week at the time of testing. So my testing time has been far more limited than I really typically would like. Please bear that in mind in terms of some of the results that I've got, because I've not been able to have this phone for anywhere near as long as I might have liked for a more comprehensive review. The Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra is built around a 6.9-inch QHD Plus 1 to 120Hz dynamic AMOLED 2X display with a resolution of 3120 by 1440 pixels. Now, any phone with a 6.9-inch screen is going to be large in your hand, and that's certainly true here. The design hasn't hugely changed from last year's. There's a little bit of tinkering to make it slightly more comfortable in the hand, slightly more rounded edges than last year's model, but it's still a broadly familiar kind of phone. And even with the inclusion of Corning's Gorilla Armor 2 glass on the S25 Ultra, I'd suggest that buying a case to protect your investment in your premium smartphone would be a very, very wise move. Obviously, for the amount of time I've had it, I've not tested with a case and there is not one in the box. One of the design changes is that the S25 Ultra can lay claim to being just a little bit lighter than the S24 Ultra was. I didn't have an S24 Ultra to hand, but at a specifications level, it's about 18 grams lighter. Now, does that really matter? It's clever engineering, don't get me wrong, but it's one of those things that I think for a lot of people, it's going to be much more the psychological trick of, oh, well, it says it's lighter, so when I pick it up, I'm going to think, oh, yes, this feels lighter. This is still a big phone. Anything that tips the scales at over 200 grams is a big phone, and basically a fairly heavy phone too. I'm not sure, without me mentioning that weight difference, that too many people would actually notice it. It's not made a big difference in my day-to-day usage of the phone. I haven't immediately thought, oh, this is so feather light, because it isn't. The display on the S25 Ultra is very good, and I'd expect nothing less from Samsung. Bezels are minimal, so you're spending most of your time simply looking at its display when in use, excluding the very small hole punch array for the front-facing selfie camera. As yet, the only Samsung phones that have under-display cameras to get around this issue are its Galaxy Z Fold lines, and there the photo quality isn't great, so I can't entirely blame Samsung for skipping out on that option here. Where I would have liked to see Samsung maybe be a little bit more bold is in color choices. Now, technically, yes, you get 7 different hues sold here in Australia: titanium silver blue, titanium black, titanium grey, titanium white silver, titanium jet black, titanium jade green, or titanium pink gold. That's a lot of titanium. Now, while 7 colors sounds like a lot, and I'm sure there's a lot of engineering and R&D that goes into making those colors, the practical reality here is that essentially you've got 2 shades of black, 2 are silver, 1 grey that sits between them, and then only green or pink gold to pick from. The 7 shades you can get the regular and lower cost S25 and S25 Plus cover a much wider spectrum of the rainbow and give you more choice, so why do the pricier models get such a subdued range of hues? The other big design point for the Galaxy S Ultra line is, of course, the inclusion of the S Pen. That's been a feature of the Ultra phones for a while now, ever since the death of the Note line. And like prior models, it pops out from the lower left-hand side of the phone and might not look that different to you, although there is one big change here. I've got to say, it's not one that's massively affected me because I'm not a big S Pen user, but this is the first of these style of S Pens which is not Bluetooth compatible. Now, why does that matter? Well, you lose a few features. You lose all the hover features, but you also lose the remote features. So previously, you could use the S Pen as a remote shutter or to click through slides, for example. You just can't do that anymore. Samsung's contention appears to be that very few people were actually doing this. And as I say, I'm not a big S Pen user, so it hasn't affected me too much. But a phone that does less is just that slight bit less compelling. Flagship smartphones often live and die on the quality of their cameras. And this is a good thing because it pushes innovation in the smartphone camera space generally. Those features that are first in flagships come down to mid-range and eventually the budget range phones as well. And that's why it's possible these days to buy, especially mid-range phones with some surprisingly good cameras, and that keeps the pressure on these premium flagships. The pace of innovation basically means that phone makers that want to stand out need to keep things moving along at a brisk pace. This isn't what Samsung's done. Because it's hard to look at the Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra's cameras and not see Samsung somewhat resting on its laurels. What you get is a 50 megapixel ultra wide lens, 200 megapixel wide lens, and then dual telephoto 50 megapixel and 10 megapixel lenses at the rear, plus a 12 megapixel front facing selfie camera. And the only hardware upgrade there, year on year, is the bump up for that ultra wide to 50 megapixels. Great if you like your landscape shots, I guess. Not exactly a killer enticing feature in and of itself, but still, the S24 Ultra was a really good camera phone, and this basically is too. I can't really fault its everyday camera quality because it's perfectly acceptable, quite good in a lot of situations. You can get some really nice, pleasing photos. I mean, I don't make the best selfie subject, but I'll do. But then, of course, the challenge there is that your mid-range phones can take good, basic photos these days. You don't need the S25 Ultra for that kind of thing. So there need to be some standout points. Is it in telephoto, where this will bounce up to 100 times space zoom? That's Samsung's term for it. It's just 100 times digital hybrid zoom in the real world. Well, no. And look, this is not new either, because full 100 times zoom is always choppy as heck. And I'll give you an example here just of a local fountain. If I take a shot just with the ultra wide lens, that new 50 megapixel lens, yeah, that's fine. If we bounce that up to 1 times, all still fine. 2 times, which is a crop of that 1 times lens, because telephoto doesn't kick in until 3 times, again, works perfectly well, as does 3 and 5, as you'd expect. 10 times is quite nice. Now, that's obviously a hybrid zoom there. And even up to 30 times is okay. The framing here is not spectacular, but 30 times is typically about where I see the limit on these kinds of zooms, because 100 times is just plain ugly. Then, of course, you've got low light capabilities. And here I've done a complete comparison head-to-head video, which I am going to drop in here. So you've already watched that. You can skip forward a couple of minutes. Otherwise, I'll see you on the other end of that one. Hey there, Alex Kidman here, just with a quick low light comparison video for the Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra, primarily because I'm in the middle of testing it at the moment. And last night I went out and did a little bit of low light shooting just to get some comparative shots against the iPhone 16 Pro Max and Pixel 9 Pro Fold. Now, before we start, a couple of ground rules. Everything was shot freehand. There were no tripods involved. Everything was shot automatic. Now, obviously, you can alter things up an awful lot if you go into pro modes, but an awful lot of people are just going to want to pick up their phones, take a photo, and get something as good as possible. So that's what I've gone for here. Also, I have not done any adjustments on these photos whatsoever, but obviously I can't control what your screen or YouTube does to them. Now, on with the show. And a big part of the reason for doing this review is because Samsung's made claims that its nightography, its low light photography on the S25 Ultra is improved over previous generations. Already pretty good, but I do want to see what it was like side to side. This tree is an interesting example where actually I think the Samsung gets it, because the iPhone shot is pretty good, but it's quite a bit darker towards the top of the tree. It doesn't get quite as much light detail in there. The iPhone does tend to paint the grass a little bit greener, which I guess is aesthetic, but maybe not as accurate to life. And the Pixel kind of sits somewhere in the middle of the two. But all three are pretty good, pretty decent photos in an area where I couldn't see a whole lot of light going on. This field shot is one that I've used over the years hundreds of times for low light testing, and the Pixel is easily the worst of them. It's not a bad shot, but it does that thing that Pixels do where Google's estimation tends to paint the ground green rather than actually getting it kind of accurate. The iPhone delivers a pleasing photo here. Aesthetically, it's quite nice, but it is a little bit color oversaturated as a result, especially in that foreground where the Samsung actually delivers a more true to life shot. It's maybe not as aesthetically nice, but it's slightly more accurate. It suggests it is picking up slightly more light under these circumstances and doing a slightly better job of it as a result. Swinging back around to the clubhouse, a tricky shot because, again, the phones are just setting everything and there's light blaring out from it. The Pixel does the worst of them, but not by much. The Galaxy S25 Ultra is close to the iPhone, but I will give it to the iPhone here, just partially visual presentation, but mostly because it actually grabs a little bit more color from the trees. It suggests it's doing a slightly better job of analyzing the light around there that the Samsung didn't quite get, but it is very close. Low light, of course, does not have to mean no light. So here's a street scene with obviously some street lights in play. The Pixel, again, comes in third here, not a bad shot. And the same is broadly true for the Samsung, which delivers certainly a more aesthetically pleasing shot than the Pixel manages, but I've got to give this one to the iPhone simply because it actually picks up more light around the top of that tree, for example. It just delivers a better lit scene overall through its own analysis and through its own pickup of the available light. A reminder again, I'm not necessarily going for aesthetically pleasing shots here. I'm testing capabilities, and sometimes that's just plain ordinary dull shots too. The other thing people like to do in low light, of course, is take selfies. And here there's a big difference, but there's a big difference because both Apple and Samsung, if you are in low light and you engage the selfie portrait camera, put up a big glowing disc. Basically, they illuminate your face. Now, is that cheating? Is that accurate? Well, I've got to be honest, it works. And I can demonstrate this no better than by showing you what the Pixel, which doesn't do that, managed to make of my face in low light. I mean, wow, I look very 70s album cover maybe. I've fallen into an accidental Doctor Who dimension. I'm not really sure what's going on here. I'm just sure that this is easily the worst photo I took all night, and it's not even vaguely close. This is just bad on so many levels while being artistically weird. The iPhone did a much better job of it. There's still a bit of grain here. It's still not perfect and ideal, and there's no other light sources on my face, I should point out. And this was taken in the exact same spot as the Pixel photo, I should also point out. But it does a decent enough job. But again, I will give this to the Samsung just because it does a slightly better job again. None of these are things I'm going to want to use as a passport photo, and obviously you're stuck with the fact that I'm taking photos of my own face, which is, again, not the most aesthetically pleasing thing. But here the Samsung takes it. And we're back. So what do I think of the S25 Ultra's cameras? Well, look, they're good cameras. This is Samsung's flagship camera phone, really, because we can expect this year's Z Fold to probably have slightly lesser cameras than this does. And I think this competes well within that premium camera phone space. But at the same time, it's not a big bounce up from last year's phone. Not that year-on-year premium phone upgrades make that much sense, but I would have liked to see Samsung pushing the envelope maybe a little bit more in this respect. On the performance side, the Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra runs on a Snapdragon 8 Elite processor paired up with 12GB of RAM and either 256, 512GB or 1TB of fixed storage. There's no capacity for microSD card expansion, and the model that Samsung Australia loaned me was dual SIM plus eSIM capable, but as always, international models can vary and be weird in this respect. So please spare me your comments about how the local model is eSIM only or whatever. Yes, it may very well be the case. This is what I've tested in front of me, in other words. But how well does the Snapdragon 8 Elite perform? Well, the answer is really rather well. Now, for years now, in terms of like CPU benchmark shootouts, Apple has had what felt like an insurmountable lead. Pretty much any given year, I could say, right, that year's Apple A-series processor is probably the fastest thing you can get, and potentially even last year's might be faster than the fastest Snapdragon. Well, those days are over. Here's how the S25 Ultra compares using Geekbench 6's CPU test. It's been a long, long time since the top of that chart didn't have Apple as the prefix for a phone name, but Samsung has managed it. And it won't be alone in incorporating the Snapdragon 8 Elite into its phones this year, which means that it could be very interesting in comparative and value terms for phones in the flagship space this year. It's even better news for Samsung on the GPU performance side, as we can see with 3D Mark Wildlife Extreme. The one slight caveat that I would put on those figures when compared against Apple's efforts is that most app development for iOS that taxes the GPU tends, to my understanding, to more use Apple's specific Metal framework for added efficiency. So it's not a straight up like-for-like comparison in terms of the GPU-intensive apps you're likely to use there. Still, there's no denying the Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra is a seriously powerful smartphone. And like so many flagship phones, you're arguably slightly overstuffed with power here, unless you're going to, for example, use the Galaxy S25 Ultra as your effective laptop via DeX or things like that. Most people, I suspect, won't do that, but then there is another advantage to having this power, and that's in terms of future proofing, because this is a phone that's really powerful now, and that means it should last out its life staying a nicely powerful phone. Helped, of course, by the fact that Samsung offers 7 years of OS updates and 7 years of security upgrades for the S25 Ultra. Now, you won't get those quite as fast as you might say on a Pixel, but you'll still get them for 7 years. And after 7 years, this should still be a nicely powerful phone. I would expect in 7 years we'll have even more powerful phones, of course, but this should still be a decent competitor. Basically, it's going to keep its value longer, which is a good thing. Of course, the other area where Samsung really wants to push the Galaxy S25 Ultra into your hands as a must-have device is via Galaxy AI. Its specific take on AI, because every smartphone's got to have AI. Although I'm still not 100% sold on all of this. Now, it's getting a lot of the features that the Pixel phones have. It has Gemini. Weirdly, it also has Bixby. I don't love Bixby, and it's slightly strange, to be honest, to have dueling voice assistants on the same phone, but they seem to coexist well enough. I can't get too excited about having features that other phones have, however. It's not really a big selling point. You do get a few Galaxy AI specific features, though. The problem is very few of them are all that exciting. You get the Now Brief, for example, which is meant to use AI to intelligently give me the details about my day in a snapshot view. And it's nice in theory, but the implementation certainly hasn't wowed me for the period I've had it. Now, maybe that's a limitation of only having it for the week. Maybe it'll get smarter about me and tell me more and do more. But right now, it'll give me a weather forecast. It'll point me towards YouTube. It's apparently meant to give me news highlights, but I've certainly never seen anything during my review period. And I'm just not sure that I want or need this. I can launch apps to do this kind of thing. This isn't saving me time. It's just sort of there. You also get Drawing Assist, and here, of course, the S Pen can kick in. Now, I am not an artist, but I'll give you an example of how Drawing Assist works. I made this quick drawing of what's meant to be Godzilla. Yes, I know, it's awful. I'm a words guy, not a drawing guy, okay? And you can add text prompts to this as well. So I told it, look, I want Godzilla breathing fire over Tokyo, but that got me into trouble with Drawing Assist. Not for an impending Toho lawsuit, but because it might contain what it called inappropriate content. Galaxy AI, as it turns out, has very strict ideas about what's appropriate or not for kaiju to engage in, because even Godzilla breathing fire wasn't acceptable either. But just Godzilla was. And here, yes, it delivered some pictures, but they're exactly the same kinds and styles of Godzilla pictures that I've seen in other devices. Now, for example, when I tested out the Galaxy Tab S10, that's not a big surprise, let's face it, because it's also using Galaxy AI. But it's also the case for the Pixel 9 Pro's Pixel Studio software. And this highlights a big problem with AI for this kind of image generation, because what it's doing is not creative, it's synthesis. It's taking what it knows about a subject and going, right, well, this is what this is sort of meant to look like. And as a result, it can't get that creative. You can't get those actual human creative moments because it's not a human being. This is also sort of my problem with it for text, but I accept that there are some people who really like that kind of thing. Now, you can also use photos with Drawing Assist to try and create new images. So I thought I'd throw that low-light selfie that I took of myself with the S25 Ultra at it to see if it could make some interesting images of me. And instead, it made this guy. I don't know who that is, but it's not me. So I thought, all right, well, I'll try again. Yeah, this isn't me, even if you put it in a suit. Actually, putting it in a suit makes it even less likely to be me. All up, I'm just not that thrilled by Galaxy AI. At some point, Samsung is going to start charging money for it, but what they're offering right now just doesn't feel worth it to me. I'm willing to accept that there are some people out there who might have very different opinions, and if you do, leave a comment below. The Galaxy S25 Ultra is a large phone, and that could have given Samsung scope to pack in even more battery capacity behind its immense frame. Samsung basically didn't do this, instead opting for that 18-gram weight drop from the S24 Ultra line and leaving it with a 5,000 mAh battery. Now, that's not tiny in battery life terms, but in Android terms, that's absolute dead set average. There are smaller phones than this that have 5,000 mAh batteries in them. And that concerned me because such a powerful phone is likely to want a lot of battery energy to operate because it's a powerful phone. And that could be problematic unless there's a lot of battery optimization going on behind the scenes. So to test that, I turned to my standard YouTube battery test. Now, I've got a whole video on the variability of battery tests and why you should read around and watch around as much as possible to get a complete picture. I'll leave a link to that in the description below. But here's how the S25 Ultra compared against those other flagship phones. I don't have the 2 and 3 hour figures for the Z Fold 6 or S25 Ultra, which is why they've only got the single bar there. That's their 1 hour figure. And given the processing power at play here, those aren't bad figures for the S25 Ultra at all. Sure, they're not the best in class either, but they're solid through that first hour, where phones that drop below 90% often flag themselves as problematic for a single day's usage, while lasting reasonably well through the second and third hours of usage. And while my own anecdotal testing has obviously been shorter than I would have liked, I can certainly say this is a phone that's got scope for most users to last out a day unless you're hammering it relentlessly, and there's just no phone that lasts under those circumstances. Like so many premium phones, there's no charger in the box with the Galaxy S25 Ultra, just a USB-C to USB-C charging cable, so you'll have to provide your own charger up to 45 watts for wired charging. Wireless charging is supported, and so is Qi 2, sort of. So technically speaking, the Galaxy S25 Ultra can charge at up to Qi 2's maximum wireless rates, but if you drop it onto a Qi 2 charger, especially an angled one, it's going to slide right off. And that's because the S25 Ultra supports the Qi 2 charging speeds, but not the incorporation of magnetic coils within the body of the phone that would make it grippy, that would make it align properly all of the time without a Qi 2 secondary case. And Samsung, naturally enough, sells those if you're so inclined. Now, at one level, magnetic cases to do this kind of thing are nothing new, although the promise here is that if you don't have a Qi 2 certified case, you might not get those full speeds because the alignment might not be quite right. It's still ultimately disappointing to me that Samsung hasn't said, hey, we can help speed the adoption of Qi 2 by bringing it to our flagship range in early 2025. It works, it functions on a flat Qi 2 charger. Yes, it will charge reasonably quickly, but I really feel like Samsung could have done more here. So should you buy the Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra? Well, look, at one level, this is a really good phone with really good cameras, excellent performance, decent battery life, and a great display. It's not inexpensive, of course, but we are playing in the premium end of the pool here. The big question is really whether or not that's enough for you in your circumstances. Because if you're already rocking a Galaxy S24 Ultra or even maybe a S23 Ultra, the answer to that should be no. And obviously, that brings with it the spectre of whether or not you should perhaps buy a cheaper S24 Ultra right now. I can see some arguments in favor of that, actually. The S25 Ultra is faster, it is a little nicer, but this is still a phone that costs over $2,000 here in Australia. And even if you could get a trade-in for your existing unit, I can't see the upgrade from those models being worth it. From earlier premium Galaxy S phones, yes, absolutely. From earlier phones generally, yeah, there's a case to be said here. That being said, the big push here is Galaxy AI, and I'm still just not feeling that as a consumer must-have. It's nice in some aspects, it's remarkably stupid in others. It doesn't thrill me, and certainly I wouldn't pay the extra to get it right now, and I think Samsung's going to have to seriously consider what it thinks it can charge for it by the end of 2025, because that's when it said it may start charging for Galaxy AI features. The additional rub here, though, is also that if you just want a reasonably powerful phone, the S25 and S25 Plus, which I've not been able to test out, are of course cheaper, as is the S24 FE. That would actually be my general call if you want a nice Samsung phone right now. It's not super inexpensive, of course, but it's reasonably powerful. It's got good cameras. It's got nice... Does all of this sound familiar? Yeah, it's also about half the price of this phone. So from the Samsung perspective, I think that's actually the best phone they've got right now. This is a really great phone, and if you can afford it, you'll have a lot of fun with it. But if I was buying a new premium-ish Samsung phone, the S24 FE is the one that I'd suggest you buy. And that's my take on the Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra. Got any questions? Hit me up in the comments below. And as always, don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and please consider becoming a Patreon or Ko-Fi supporter.